Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Dan Pink, the author of multiple New York Times bestsellers, including To Sell is Human and the book that is the subject of this conversation, When? The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. Now, this episode was originally recorded in October of 2018, but it contained so much value for the listener that I wanted to bring it up our archives and share it with you again. So join us today as Dan explains that how success in sales is not just about how you sell or what you sell. In fact, as you'll learn in a conversation today, it's also about when you sell. Timing is a science, and it can make a difference at what time during the day you undertake to do certain tasks, like making calls or writing a proposal. We all have intuition about whether we work better in the morning or the night. And as Dan and I get into in our conversation today, we now have science, not intuition, to help us make timing decisions based on evidence, data, and facts. So Dan lays out the aspects of timing and what research in social psychology and biology reveal about your best times to prospect, to sell, to analyze data, to provide insights. Because your cognitive abilities vary over the course of a day. And as Dan points out in his book, it's called the synchrony effect. And Dan will share tips on how to align the right type of task with the right time of day for your chronotype. All this and much, much more. But before I get to Dan, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thanks. All right, let's jump into it with Dan.
Andy Paul, thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. So we're here to talk about your latest book, When? The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And is there such a thing?
Perfect timing, no. Better timing, absolutely. And the way to have better timing is to recognize that timing is not an art, it's a science. And unfortunately, whether we're salespeople, sales managers, whatever our profession is, we tend to make our timing decisions based on intuition and guesswork, or really, in most cases, really by default. Tradition. And that's the wrong way to do it. We should be making it based on evidence, data, facts.
Yeah, well, it's oral tradition in sales, almost more than anything else, still seems to carry the day. So you wrote that what ultimately matters is the type of task and how task and time align, and you talked about what you called the synchrony effect. So explain what that means to people.
Sure. Let me take one step back, though, and just say this. So what we know, when we think about timing, there are different aspects of timing. So there's timing over the course of the day. There's timing over the course of a lifetime, over the course of a project, over the course of a career, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of this research, so what I wrote about is really built on this wide array of research from multiple fields about timing. So it's research in social psychology, it's in economics, but it's also in chronobiology, molecular biology, endocrinology. And so all this vast research gives us some clues about how to make timing essentially our ally rather than our enemy. Now, when we talk about the unit of the day, which is what we're talking about here,
right,
the most important thing to keep in mind is the following. The biggest idea is this. Our brain power, our cognitive abilities do not remain static over the course of the day. They change. They change in material ways. They change in predictable ways. And the right time to do something depends on what we're doing. And that's what you're talking. That's when you refer to the synchrony effect. That's what it is. So if we know our brain power is going to change over the course of the day, and we know that sometimes a day are better than others depending on the task, how do we proceed? And synchrony effect is how do we line up our chronotype, our type, with what we're doing, our task, with our time. And that's what that is. How do you bring those three things, type, task, and time, into alignment?
Yeah, I thought an interesting tidbit you had in the book is that, especially for old guys like me, is that some of these like memory issues are really more a function of the synchrony, right?
There are some very interesting. It's interesting you point that out. There's some very interesting research showing that, particularly, I mean, you're not that old.
You'd be surprised.
You're not that much older than I am. Although I know a little bit about you, so I know that you are a little older than I am. But regardless, here's the point: that if you actually do in certain populations, if you take, like, say, memory, let's use the concept of memory. It's often used as a proxy for cognitive decline, a proxy, maybe a harbinger of dementia and whatnot. That a lot of the effects that when older people do memory tasks in the morning, they basically perform like younger people. And when they do it, it's really when they're doing the memory tasks in the afternoon where there's a deterioration. And the thing is like that's true of a lot of us in a lot of different domains. So if you look at performance over time, I mean, there's so much evidence of this. So if you look at like healthcare, doctors make anesthesia errors are 4 times as likely at 3 p.m. as they are at 9 a.m.
Yeah, when I read that section, I was like, if I ever go in the hospital again, and I've fortunately, I've had a couple surgeries. They were first thing in the morning, and I thought, oh, that's good.
Good. That's how you do it. Colonoscopies, because everybody likes to talk about those. Doctors find half as many polyps in afternoon exams as they do in morning exams. So all of this is, the idea here, and you see this in so many different domains, Andy, as you know from the book. You see it in how people assess their mood, but you see it very, very clearly in performance. And it's performance not only in one thing, but it's performance in a lot of things. So you see differences in performance at the corporate level based on time of day. You see some pretty dramatic differences in education performance over the course of a day.
Well, and we've got all this conversation going on now about start times for high schoolers.
Absolutely. Amen. You see different performances by judges and juries based on time of day, by healthcare providers based on time of day. Essentially, every domain of life, again, our brain power changes over the course of the day. So what you want to do, what one wants to do, is to do the right stuff at the right time. All right, and it's actually a fairly systematic way to get that done.
All right, so let's describe. So there's people can picture this in their minds. You wake up and you sort of are on this peak till about 11 in the morning. It looks like, right? Sort of an increasing.
Well, it depends on
your chronotype, right?
Exactly. So let's talk about that first. Okay. Let's talk about the chronotype. Chronotype is basically it's a word out of this entire field of chronobiology, which is chrono time,
right.
Biology, study of life. So it's study of biological rhythms. The last year's Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to 3 chronobiologists to help understand our circadian and other kinds of rhythms, how they affect who we are, how we do things. And so what we know about this, some of us are morning people, some of us are evening people, most of us are in between. So about 15% of us are very strong larks, morning people. About 20% of us are very strong owls, evening people, and about 2/3 of us are in between, what I call third person. So what you have to do is you have to identify where you are in that. And if you break that down, about 80%, basically think of it like this. Are you an owl or not an owl? Owls are much more complicated than the rest of us. So about 80% of us, as you say, move through the day in that order. Peak, trough, recovery. Peak early in the day, trough in the middle of the day, recovery later in the day.
But looking at the graphs in your book, though, it seemed like that peak was sort of like right before noon.
Yeah, it's going to vary from person to person. I mean, those are large, like a lot of those charts represent basically this a compilation of a large population.
Right.
And so how it's going to operate for each individual, there's going to be some variance there.
Sure.
But what we know is like a design principle, peak for most of us, peak early in the day, generally the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want someone who's in their peak to stop working at 12:15 because Andy told them to. You peak early in the day, and then this trough period in the middle of the day, and then a recovery later in the day. Now, owls, those of us with late chronotypes, while we tend to hit, the most important thing for them is they go kind of sort of in the reverse order, recovery, trough, peak. But the main thing for them is their peak is much later in the day, afternoon, late afternoon, early evening, mid-evening, even late evening.
Right, and you gave the example of an author who basically started work at like midnight and then wrote through the night.
I don't know how anybody does that, but I'm not an owl.
I'm not either. So I was trying to figure out. I think I'm the 3-bird.
The odds are that you are, because 2/3 of us are that way. But we can figure out your chronotype right now. We want to do that?
Sure, let's do it.
There's a back of the envelope way to do this. Now, There are, for your listeners, you can go online and find something called the MCTQ, the Munich Chronotype Questionnaire. You can find something called the MEQ, the Morning Eveningness Questionnaire. Those are classic kind of psychological instruments where you answer a number of questions and they give you a rating. But there's actually a pretty accurate back of the envelope way we can do with you.
Sure.
I want you to think about this. So I want you to think about what chronobiologists call a free day. A free day, and that's important. A free day is a day where you don't have to wake up to an alarm clock.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to wake up to an alarm clock. You don't have to be, like this morning, I had to wake up to an alarm clock because I had to take my 15-year-old son somewhere
right.
at 8 o'clock. Okay, so I had to get up when I didn't really want to get up. So not when you have to wake up to an alarm clock, but also not when you're massively sleep deprived and you're trying to catch up on sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So you just like go to sleep when you want. You can wake up when you want, just answering whatever your body is basically telling you to do. So on those kinds of days, Andy, those free days, what time would you typically go to sleep?
11.
11. Okay. And what time would you typically wake up?
Between 5 and 6.
5 and 6. Let's say 6, just to make it easier. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're figuring out your midpoint of sleep. Your midpoint of sleep. So if your midpoint of sleep, so if you go to sleep at 11 and wake up at 6, your midpoint of sleep is 2:30. Yeah. Okay. So here's what we know. If your midpoint of sleep is earlier than 3:30, you're probably a lark. So you're pretty larky.
Oh, okay.
If that makes sense to you.
Sure.
I mean, okay. So if your midpoint of sleep is between 3:30 and 5:30 a.m., you're probably third bird. And if your midpoint of sleep is after 5:30, you're probably an owl. So again, if you're before 3:30, if your midpoint is before 3:30, lark. After 5:30, owl. In between 5:30 and 3:30, you're probably third.
Yeah,
that's actually pretty lucky.
Yeah, makes sense.
So what this means is that so you, Andy, are going to go through the day peak trough recovery, and for you, your peak is probably going to begin a little earlier than say my peak. So I'm in the middle, but lean a little bit toward the lark side. So for me, what time do you typically get to work? Start working. Start your work day.
About 8.
8. Okay. See, for me, I'm like closer to 9.
Yeah.
And so that sort of makes sense. So anyway, so here's what we got. We got our type. All right. If you're a lark or a third bird, peak trough recovery.
Right.
If you're an owl, much more complicated. Your peak is later in the day. Now, here's what we know about each of those 3 stages. 1, the peak. Again, for most of us early in the day,
mm-hmm.
Here's the key thing about the peak. That's when we're highest in vigilance. Vigilance. That's the big thing here. Vigilance. When we're vigilant, we're able to bat away distractions.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to lock down focus. So the peak is the best time for analytic work that requires heads down, focus, attention, analyzing data, preparing a spreadsheet, writing, those kinds of things that require that intense, undistracted focus.
So
during the trough,
is it focus more than analytical? So creative works as well then.
Well, it's both. Okay. It's actually more analytical. Okay. It's things that require very good question. Things that require kind of focused thinking. All right. So when you're trying to brainstorm, for instance, you don't want focused thinking.
Right.
All right. So if you're brainstorming, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? That's not focused thinking. That's much more expansive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so that focused thinking. Now, if you think about something, the border between what's an analytic task and what's an insight task, that's not a perfectly demarcated border. No, demilitarized zone, right in between to say, here's this and here's this. Things are mushier than that. So, for instance, I'll give you an example of like writing. Okay, we think of writing as a quote unquote creative task, and at some level it is. But and I'm a writer.
Sure.
A lot of writing is basically about making the words march in order. And for writers, any writer knows the greatest enemy of writing is distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anybody who writes are easily distracted. At some level, the whole world is organizing itself to distract you when you're trying to write something. Right. So you want to do your writing when you're highest in vigilance, when you're able to bat away distractions most easily. And so that's during our peak, which for most of us is early in the day. During the trough, which for most of us is, early afternoon, mid-afternoon, that's a very bad time of day. There are all kinds of drops in performance during that time. And so you're better off then doing your administrative work that doesn't require massive focused thinking or massive creative thinking. Answering your routine emails or
doing your expense reports, updating CRM.
Exactly those kinds of things. I was trying to think what I had to do. So like for me, it's like when I looked at my list for not yet, it doesn't matter, but not yesterday, but the day before, I had a bunch of receipts, so I got to send in some receipts to get reimbursed for stuff. I had a few contracts to sign. I had some email that I hadn't gotten back to, that kind of stuff. All right. Recovery. Recovery is a very interesting time of day. Again, for the 80% of us who are not owls. During the recovery period, our mood goes back up. Our mood is pretty hot, but we're less vigilant. And this is going to your earlier point. So that combination of enhanced mood and less vigilance makes it a good time for that more purely creative stuff. So instead of saying, boy, I have to write 500 words, you can say, what would be a cool title for this, a headline for this article that I'm writing? What would be a groovy thing that we could do marketing? Let me get Andy and 3 cool people on the line, and let's brainstorm ideas for a new name of this product that we're launching.
Right.
That kind of thing that requires, like some kind of looseness. Again, not to beat this horse too severely, but when you're brainstorming, you don't want people being hyper vigilant. Like you've been in brainstorming sessions where people are like, that's a crappy idea, that's a bad idea. That's not a useful brainstorming session. You want people who are a little bit looser. And that's basically it in this extraordinarily long and tortured explanation. What you want is you want to do your analytic work, the heads down focus work during the peak. You want to do your administrative work during the trough. And you want to do your creative insight work. That's what the psychologists call insight problems during the recovery. And that's it. Now, those are the design guidelines, the design principles. People have to experiment, day by day about what's going to work for them. Like for me, I don't do very good work after 8 p.m. So you want to invite me to a brainstorming session at 8:30, I'm not going to be very good. I'm not going to be very useful.
I agree.
You want to invite me to a brainstorming session at 6, I'll probably be in pretty good shape.
All right. I'm putting that on my calendar. So it's interesting when you think about that, because when I think about sales, and only done it for 4 decades, so I'm still learning, but it almost seems like if you want to have best sales conversations, you want to do that in the rebound period, because you're being open-minded, you're listening, maybe your curiosity is a little more piqued than it is in the morning when you're more analytic. Yet I can guarantee you that 99.9% of sales organizations force their salespeople to do their calls between 9 and 11 in the morning.
Yeah, that's not always a terrible idea.
Okay.
And I'll explain why.
Sure.
But you actually raise an even more important point right there. You raise an even more important point embedded in there.
All right. Probably
like one of the biggest points I think going on in business today. So let me bracket that for now, and we'll move to the specific thing. Okay. So what we know from a lot of research, and especially research from certain kinds of judicial decision making, is this: when people make decisions, particularly when they're decisions that are reasonably binary, yes, no. Okay, think about a yes, no decision, and that's what a sales call is. I'm coming to you. Are you in or are you out? Do you want to buy or do you not? Do you want to sign on the line that is dotted or kick me out of the office? All right. That is the
potentially, but yeah, we'll get back to that. I think.
Okay, good. It's a very good point, because some sales processes are much longer.
If it's a transactional call, absolutely, yeah.
Right. Okay, so when people come into a transaction, when people come into a decision like that, when they have to make a decision, in the back pocket is a default decision, right? They have a default. And the default is usually no.
Right.
So the question is, when are people likely to overcome the default? And what some of the research shows is that people are slightly, I don't want to go crazy here, slightly more likely to overcome the default when early in the day and immediately after breaks. Early in the day and immediately after breaks.
Okay.
Now, some of the earliness has to do with people's mood. Right. So their willingness to move through things quickly and be in a good mood sometimes can get, okay, that sounds good, go. So early in the day and immediately after breaks. Now, I don't want to overstate this. What it means, and I think salespeople can understand this very well, is that let's say that I go to you and I have a 7% chance of getting a yes from you in whatever I'm pitching or whatever. All right. And let's say I pick the right time of day. Maybe I can notch that up to a 9% chance. I still got a 91% chance of failing. All right. So this doesn't lock it down. But here's the thing, as any good salesperson knows, if you can get a 2 percentage point increase in your take-up rate over time, that's going to redound to your advantage. And so that's what it shows there. So talk to me. But let's talk about things that are less transactional. Give me your feedback on that.
Well, I think if you're dealing with the sale,
I think you're on the right. I think your instincts are quite good.
Yeah, I mean, anything with more complexity, right? Where it's not just a transactional sale in and out. I mean, a cold call on the beginning of a complex sale is that more sort of yes, no initially.
Yeah.
But once you're past that point and you're in the process of communicating and trying to serve the buyer and help them get a better understanding what their problems and challenges are and how you can help them, to me, that's a really creative pursuit.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. It could be creative for you. I'm not sure. You have to make sure that it's also that they're being in a creative path is right for them.
Right.
One of the things that you probably don't want to do is do a sales call at 2 p.m. because we know that that's basically the bottom of people's mood. Right. They're not focused. They're
sleeping.
Yeah. They're distracted. It's like, I mean, here's the thing. Like, don't make a sales call at 2 p.m. Don't have surgery at 2 p.m. Yeah. I mean, to some extent, don't get in your car at 2 p.m. If you look at the data on auto accidents, obviously, the more auto accidents, the more cars there are on the road because there's exponentially more possibilities for collisions. Mm-hmm. But if you control for that, if you control for cars on the road, the most dangerous time to be on the road in America is 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Second most dangerous time to be on the road in America is 2 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Why the first one? As an avid bike rider that's sometimes on the road at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning.
For 4 a.m., if you think about who's on, I think it's I don't know because we have correlations here.
But you think maybe it's owls?
I think that someone on the road at 4 a.m. might be drunk. Someone on the road at 4 a.m. can't see very well because it's pitch dark. What we have here is correlations.
Sure.
But so you can't say exactly why this is happening. But that would be my speculation. I mean, the easiest, simplest explanation for why it's dangerous to be on the road at 4 a.m. is that it's blindingly dark, and most people aren't fully awake then. So that makes it suboptimal.
I've got big strobes on my bike, but 2 to 4 in the afternoon, absolutely, I stay off the road.
Dude, I mean,
for sure.
Again, it's just we're talking about probabilities here. Yeah. But here's the point, Andy, that I wanted to make because I think that baked into your questions and your point of view is the most important point, which is this: we should be asking these questions, and we don't know for certain in every individual case what the right answer is. So, what we need to be doing, whether we're salespeople, whether we are no matter what our job is we should be acting a lot more like scientists. What do scientists do? Mm-hmm. Scientists have hypotheses and they test hypotheses. Right. And that's the way to go. So what I want people to do is take these principles, okay, which are true in the aggregate, and not going to be true in every instance for every person at every moment, and say, hey, wait a second, I'm this kind of I'm this kind of salesperson. Maybe when I'm doing, maybe I'm better off talking to my prospects in this consultative sale at 4 p.m. rather than first thing in the morning when they're a little bit more expansive. The science is telling me that's probably the case. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk to one portion of my clients in this consultative, this particular stage of the sales process. Let's say a purely consultative. I don't have the deal yet, but I'm still in this it's a consultative sale. Mm-hmm. It's a longer term, more complex sale. I'm at this particular stage. I'm going to do this stage at 4 o'clock with some prospects and this stage at 9 o'clock with other prospects. And I'm going to pay attention and I'm going to see if there's a difference. And if there's no difference, I'm not going to sweat it. But if there is a difference, if I feel like I'm doing better and we're getting better work done at 4, I'm going to keep doing that. And then I'm going to have another hypothesis. And my other hypothesis is going to be that, hey, in a cold call or something like that, or in a first encounter, people are more likely to overcome the default immediately or early in the morning and immediately after breaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get my assistant to try to figure out some of the break times for some of these prospects, and I'm going to try to reach out to them immediately after their breaks and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah.
And that's, and that's what you do. You take the science, you take the principle, and then you act like a scientist yourself and test it.
Yeah. I can't tell you how much I agree with that. I mean, one of my
you were saying it. Yeah. I mean, I'm basically the voice of it. Well, I was saying like sort of baked into your questions was like, this is how we should do things.
Yeah, one of my great frustrations in sales in general these days is over the last 5-10 years, the sales process has become so rigid, and it's all about metrics. Because now we have technology, because it's all this data, and we don't give people this freedom to test and to find what works best for them. I mean, this is, if you listen to anything I do or read anything I write, this is one I keep talking about: is how do we give people enable people to become the best version of themselves. And this is an example of, because the best version, as you talked about early on, and I'm a huge believer in this in sales, is that the margin of victory should be assumed to be 1%. Between you and somebody you beat for a deal. I mean, there's no way to quantify it, right? You can't say I'm 5% better, I'm 10% better. So assume it's 1%. So what are the 1% things you can work on? It's sort of like the guy who's the manager of the Sky bicycle team in the Tour de France. His whole thing is, the aggregation of marginal gains. How I can get 1% better and just position on the bike, the suits we wear, I mean, everything. And this, our chronotype, and paying attention to that, is one of these things that could make us 1% better, and we just need to pay attention to it.
Absolutely. And I also think that you actually have the accumulative effect, because if you're always testing, you're getting that 1% improvement, 1% improvement, 1% improvement over and over again. It's not a one-off, because there are all kinds of things that you can do. And here's the thing: our friends in the marketing department actually are pretty good at this, because especially on the digital side, they do a lot of A/B tests, and that's all I'm talking about. I'm talking about A/B tests are a powerful way to understand what's really going on. Absolutely. You talked about the oral tradition and storytelling and folklore. Yeah, in some level, folklore is a way to understand how things work and how things go along. For many kinds of professional endeavors, folklore can offer some guidance, but I'm not going to rely on it. I'm going to rely less on a doctor steeped heavily in folklore than I am in a doctor knowing that she's read the latest medical journals, which are full of randomized controlled trials about the particular ailment that I'm facing. So our friends in marketing do A/B tests. We should be doing A/B tests, whatever our function is.
Yeah. Well, I thought, and to that point about marketing, is when I was reading your book, then I stopped and went online and Googled, okay, what's the optimal time of day, or at what time of day do emails get open most frequently? And 11 a.m.
Yeah, it depends though. Here's the thing: is like that's at some levels that's all over the place. What kind of emails? Emails from whom? Emails to whom?
Yeah, variables you can't control. But
that's a very easy. Listen, that's a very easy thing to. That's a very, very easy thing to test. I have an email newsletter. We A/B test all kinds of stuff. Right. We A/B test headlines, because I want to serve my readers as best as I possibly can. Yep. And so I think I'm putting out good content. So we once A/B tested on. We once A/B tested on length. Like, am I overwhelming people with too much information, or am I giving people too little? We tested different versions of it, and it turned out it made no difference at all. People just want good stuff. They like good stuff when it's short. They like good stuff when it's long. And so, okay, I'm not going to sweat this.
That means that they didn't read past the short version. So even on your long emails.
Well, no, because but here's the thing:
you had links. You had links. I know.
Exactly. Yes. So we can see. Did you click a link? Really? Did you click a link at the bottom of this long one? And to our amazement, a lot of people did.
Yeah.
So again, we can have hypotheses about things. We can have a hypothesis. Oh, everybody's so distracted; they only want short stuff. And you can test the hypothesis and say, well, my group of readers at this moment, maybe that's less true. Mm-hmm.
So question: What's off topic now? So what's your next book going to be about?
I have no idea. You got any ideas for me?
Yeah, curiosity.
Curiosity. Okay, there are a few books on curiosity that are out there.
I think it's come out recently, but it's
I think it's a great point. I think it's a great topic. I think it's really interesting, and I know that I look for that trait in both people I work with, but also people I'm friends with.
Mm-hmm.
So people who I'm friendly with who have no work connection to me, I like hanging around curious people. I also like working with curious people because I think curious people push things in a different direction, push things a little bit harder.
And I think that, take a book like When that we just read is for the curious individual, the point we were talking about earlier is there's so many things to try in here, right? People just have to do it. And
absolutely.
It's one of the great, things that keeps me motivated in life is, how do we convince salespeople to invest in trying new things to not sell like we've done for the last 120 years, which is essentially what we're still doing. So,
in many, many cases, that's exactly right. Even though, in my view, sales has changed more in the last 10 years than the previous 1,000.
Yeah, but my view is less than people think. And
interesting.
So, but anyway, Dan, it's been great talking to you. We could do this forever. We'll have you back sometime. We'll talk again.
I'd love to.
So how can people get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, www.danpink.com.
Simple. All right.
All kinds of great stuff there. Resources for free. An email newsletter that's free. Information about the books. I do a regular video called the Pinkcast. All kinds of stuff for the low, low price of nothing.
Ah, love it. See? Perfect. All right, Dan, thank you very much. Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Dan Pink, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you could also leave us a rating or a review and let us know how we're doing, well, we'd certainly appreciate that as well. You can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thanks for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.